In this moment, I invite you to pause and take a deep breath. For what you are about to hear is not by coincidence, chance, or any random algorithm. It is not an accident that you are here, listening to this message. Heaven itself has intervened to speak directly to you. The words I am about to share are a divine warning, a protection, and a call to action that comes from a place of deep love and care. This message is not meant to instill fear or to condemn, but rather to rescue you from a path that, though it may seem familiar or comforting, is not aligned with the divine purpose and destiny God has placed upon your life. It is a call of mercy, an interruption from the distractions and misalignments that seek to draw you away from the fullness of God's plan for you. Heaven sees what you cannot, and in love, it steps in now to guide you towards safety and alignment. This divine message comes to you not out of control, but out of protection. It is not a message that seeks to make you feel guilty or judged. Rather, it is a message of rescue, one that offers a way out of the confusion and distractions that may be clouding your spiritual vision. The urgency of this message lies in the fact that God knows what is ahead of you. He sees the future, even when you cannot. What may seem like an innocent connection or an exciting opportunity could lead you down a path of spiritual erosion, slowly pulling you away from the clarity of His voice and the obedience He has called you to. This is why heaven is speaking now. This is why I am here, urging you to open your heart and listen with discernment, because what is being offered is not just a warning, but an opportunity for divine protection and redirection. It is the kind of love that goes beyond the surface and seeks the deepest well-being of your soul, one that will guard you from potential harm even before you can fully recognize the danger. It may be tempting to brush this message aside, to reason it away as something that does not apply to you or to your current situation. But I urge you to pause and reconsider. The urgency of this moment is not about fear. It's about an invitation to step back from something that could silently drain your spiritual energy and clarity. The relationships and connections that seem to offer comfort and security can sometimes be the very things that distract you from your higher calling. What feels familiar and soothing to your emotions may, in fact, be slowly eroding the sense of peace and purpose that God has placed within you. I'm asking you now to listen carefully and consider with an open heart, because what is being shared is not only for your protection, but for your greater destiny. Heaven sees your path ahead and is actively intervening to ensure that you stay aligned with the purpose God has for you. This is a moment for you to respond, not out of fear, but in faith, knowing that the path God is calling you to is one of clarity, alignment, and divine purpose. God's love is always at work in your life, even when you can't fully see the reasons behind the guidance you are receiving. This message is an invitation to trust, to listen with a heart that is open to His direction, and to step away from anything that would lead you off course. Divine intervention is happening now, and as you listen, may your spirit recognize the truth that is being spoken over you. This is not just a warning. It is a redirection toward a life of greater clarity, alignment, and purpose. Trust that in this moment, heaven is looking out for you, guiding you, and speaking directly into your heart. In this divine moment, understand that what you are experiencing is not by chance or coincidence. This message, this interruption in your life, is heaven's intervention. It is a purposeful and deliberate action from God, a message delivered straight from the heart of heaven itself. This is no random occurrence, no accidental timing. You have been brought to this moment with divine intention because there is something in your life that requires attention, something that needs realignment. Heaven has seen what you cannot, and it has stepped into your path now, not by coincidence, but by design. You have been chosen for this moment. The path you are on, the connections you are making, the choices you are considering, None of this has escaped heaven's watchful eye. And so, this moment, this interruption, is not a punishment, but a loving rescue from the distractions and misalignments that threaten to pull you away from the divine calling on your life. The reason for this intervention is rooted in love, not control. Many times, the human heart can mistake divine guidance for restriction, believing that following God's lead means giving up something good or losing something important. But this intervention is not about stripping you of anything that brings comfort. Rather, it's about protecting what is most valuable within you. It's about safeguarding your purpose, your destiny, and your spiritual health. When God steps in, it's not to control you, but to protect you from something that may seem harmless in the moment, but is slowly leading you away from His best for you. The love that drives this intervention is fierce and protective, like a parent pulling a child back from the edge of danger. It's a love that refuses to let you stumble or fall when there is still time to adjust your course. This intervention is a divine act of love, a love that is both tender and firm, gentle and urgent. God loves you enough to interrupt your life to ensure that you stay on the path He has destined for you. His love is not passive. It actively seeks to guide you into the fullness of His purpose for your life. In this moment, you are being called to pause and reflect. This is a divine moment in time, one that was not set by your own plans, but by heaven's perfect timing. The timing of this message is not random. It has been carefully orchestrated by God. Heaven has seen the path you are on, and it is stepping in now, in this very moment, to make sure you are not led astray. You may not fully understand why this message is coming to you now, or why it feels so urgent. You may be caught in the middle of a whirlwind of emotions or decisions, unsure of how to navigate the circumstances of your life. But what is being spoken to you today is not just an ordinary warning. It is a divine act of timing, meant to get your attention at the exact moment when you need it most. The message is not here to make you feel guilty or afraid, but to bring you back to the alignment and purpose that you may have unknowingly veered away from. Heaven sees the potential in you, and it will stop at nothing to ensure that you fulfill the destiny that has been placed on your life. This is why the call to pause is so important. In our busy lives, we often rush through decisions, brushing aside the quiet promptings of the Spirit. We become distracted by the noise of our world, and we stop listening to the still, small voice that calls us back to alignment with God's will. But this divine intervention is a sacred invitation to stop and listen, to reflect on where you are, and to consider the direction you are heading. Right now, this very moment, is the perfect time to reflect. You may feel the weight of your emotions pulling you in one direction, or your mind racing with the urgency of your circumstances. But God is asking you to pause. In this stillness, there is clarity. In this pause, there is the ability to hear the warning that has been sent for your protection. You are being invited to open your heart and let God's guidance flood in. This pause is not a delay. It is a gift. It is a divine opportunity to make a course correction before the path you are on leads you further away from God's best for you. Heaven's intervention comes at exactly the right moment because God sees what you cannot. He knows what lies ahead, even when you are still uncertain about the next step. The timing of this message is intentional and precise. It is not a coincidence that you are hearing it now. You may feel as though everything is moving too quickly, or that you are caught in a moment of decision, unsure of what to do next. But heaven is not caught off guard by your circumstances. It is fully aware of your struggles, your doubts, and your fears. And this moment, right here, is the one where God steps in to guide you. You may not understand all of the reasons why this message is coming to you now, but trust that it is for your benefit. It is a divine interruption that is designed to redirect you to the path of peace, clarity, and purpose. It is not meant to confuse you, but to clear up the uncertainty that has clouded your judgment. You are being called to hear this message with an open heart, to receive it with the understanding that this intervention is a gift of love and protection. The path ahead of you may not always be easy or comfortable, but it is the one that leads to the fulfillment of your purpose. In this moment, heaven is urging you to stop, reflect, and realign. Do not dismiss this message or try to reason it away. Heaven has sent it because it sees what you cannot. The destination you are heading toward may seem good in the short term, but God sees the potential harm that lies ahead. He is not trying to control you. He is trying to protect you from the things that could steal your peace and purpose. The timing of this message is perfect, and it comes at exactly the moment you need to hear it. As you reflect, remember that this intervention is a call to realignment. God is not asking you to give up something good, but to trust that He has something better for you. He is guiding you away from what may appear to be the right choice, and toward the one that leads to lasting peace, joy, and fulfillment. The path ahead may not always make sense, but if you trust in God's timing and guidance, you will find yourself walking in the purpose He has designed for you. This divine moment, this interruption, is not a punishment or a restriction. It is a loving invitation to walk in the fullness of your destiny. And as you listen, as you pause, you will find that the peace you have been searching for is not in the path you are on, but in the one God is guiding you toward. In the journey of life, one of the most crucial elements to your spiritual growth and destiny is the relationships you form. Relationships have a unique power. They can either lift you up toward your divine calling or slowly pull you away from it. This is why the divine message you are receiving today carries with it a deep urgency. Not every connection you encounter is a safe one. It may appear harmless, even comforting, but not every relationship is meant to be part of your life's journey. Not every connection you feel drawn to is aligned with your higher purpose. The truth is, relationships, whether with family, friends, or even romantic partners, carry an immense weight. They are either contributing to your spiritual health or draining you of your vitality. They are either aligned with the calling God has placed upon your life or subtly distracting you from it. In this moment, heaven is calling you to practice discernment, to test the spirits of the connections in your life, and to be vigilant about the impact they have on your soul. This call to discernment is not just a suggestion. It is a divine imperative. You are being urged to take a closer look at the relationships you are nurturing and to ask the difficult but necessary question: are these connections leading me closer to the destiny God has for me, or are they pulling me away from it? Scripture teaches us in 1 John 4:1 to test the spirits to see whether they are from God. This is not a call to mistrust everyone around you or to isolate yourself from others, but it is a call to be wise and to discern whether the relationships you are forming are spiritually healthy and aligned with God's will. Not every relationship that seems familiar or comforting is sent by God. Not every person you meet has been placed in your life to walk with you into your divine calling. Some relationships, no matter how close or seemingly perfect, may actually be obstacles in disguise. This is why discernment is critical. It allows you to see beyond the surface, to recognize the underlying spiritual dynamics at play, and to make choices that protect your purpose. Testing the spirits of your relationships means going beyond surface-level feelings and assessing the true impact these connections are having on your spirit. Are these relationships drawing you closer to God, Or are they slowly diminishing your spiritual sensitivity? The subtle erosion of faith, prayer, and obedience often happens through relationships that, at first glance, seem harmless or even beneficial. It may be easy to overlook the little compromises, the slow shifts in priorities, or the gradual pulling away from spiritual practices. But God is calling you to open your eyes and test the spirits of those you interact with. Are they pushing you toward God's purposes for your life, or are they subtly leading you away from your divine mission? Testing the spirits requires honesty, courage, and the willingness to face uncomfortable truths about the people and relationships in your life. Sometimes, the most spiritually costly relationships don't look dangerous at first. They may feel familiar, comforting, or even affirming. But if they are not aligned with God's will for you, they can slowly drain your energy, blur your spiritual clarity, and distort your sense of direction. It is important to understand that the cost of these misaligned relationships is not always immediate or obvious. The damage they cause often begins in subtle ways. A relationship may feel emotionally satisfying, but over time, it could begin to pull you away from the things that truly matter: your relationship with God, your spiritual growth, and your sense of purpose. Comfort is a powerful thing, and it can easily deceive us into thinking that a relationship is beneficial simply because it feels good in the moment. However, heaven is warning you that not every relationship that provides comfort is aligned with your calling. Some relationships, even though they may offer temporary emotional relief, come with hidden costs. These costs are not immediately visible, but they slowly erode your spiritual health and clarity. Relationships that seem comforting at first may lead you to compromise your values, your spiritual practices, and your obedience to God's guidance. They can pull your focus away from your higher purpose and replace it with distractions, doubts, and confusion. The hidden costs in comfort are the subtle shifts that happen when you allow relationships to dictate your choices instead of your alignment with God's will. This might look like compromising your integrity to keep the peace in a relationship, choosing convenience over obedience, or allowing emotional attachments to override your spiritual discernment. What starts as a small compromise can snowball over time, and before you know it, you find yourself spiritually drained, confused, and far from the path God intended for you. God, in His infinite love and wisdom, is calling you to protect yourself from these hidden costs by testing the spirits of your relationships. He wants you to be aware of the subtle ways in which your spirit can be misaligned, so that you can make intentional choices about who you allow into your life. This is why the call to discernment is not just a matter of choosing the right friends or partners. It is about protecting your spirit from the quiet, insidious forces that seek to weaken you. Relationships are powerful. They influence your thoughts, your behavior, and your spiritual well-being in ways you may not always recognize. That is why it is so important to be intentional about who you surround yourself with. Every relationship either contributes to your spiritual growth or detracts from it. It either strengthens your calling or slowly erodes it. Heaven is urging you to take a step back and evaluate the connections in your life. Are they leading you closer to God's purposes for you, or are they pulling you further away? When you begin to test the spirits of your relationships, you are not rejecting people or being judgmental. You are simply being wise about the influence they have on your life. You are making a conscious decision to protect the precious calling and purpose God has placed within you. There may be relationships that are good, even great on the surface, but are not meant to follow you into the next season of your life. The timing of certain connections may have come to an end, and holding on to them could hinder your progress. God's protection is not about keeping you isolated. It is about ensuring that the relationships you maintain are aligned with His will for you. The importance of testing the spirits of your relationships cannot be overstated. It is a divine act of self-care and spiritual protection. As you begin to discern the true nature of your relationships, you will find clarity, peace, and alignment with your calling. You will no longer be held captive by relationships that drain you spiritually or emotionally, but will instead be empowered to cultivate connections that support, uplift, and align with God's purposes for your life. This is not a task that should be taken lightly, but with prayer, reflection, and a deep commitment to walking in the fullness of God's plan for you. Heaven is calling you to be wise, to test the spirits, and to protect your divine destiny from anything that may seek to undermine it. Trust that as you do, God will honor your discernment and guide you into deeper alignment with His will. As you journey through life, one of the greatest dangers to your spiritual health is not necessarily dramatic events or outright distractions, but the quiet erosion of your purpose. This erosion is slow, subtle, and often imperceptible at first. What seems harmless, a relationship, a connection, or even a fleeting sense of comfort, can gradually begin to drain your focus, your spiritual sensitivity, and your obedience to God's voice. The destruction is not immediate, but it builds over time, wearing away at the clarity and strength you once had. The longer you remain in these misaligned relationships, the more difficult it becomes to recognize the spiritual damage they are causing. It's not always loud or dramatic. It's quiet and insidious, creeping into your life and leaving you spiritually drained without you even noticing. These relationships may initially offer warmth and familiarity, but the longer they stay, the more they take from you. The comfort they provide can start to overshadow the purpose God has placed within you, slowly blurring your vision and dampening your spiritual sensitivity. Heaven is warning you now to recognize these subtle shifts before they turn into an irreversible loss of direction and clarity. The relationships you keep close are either adding to your spiritual growth or pulling you further away from your divine destiny. This quiet destruction, if left unchecked, can lead you to a place of spiritual blindness, where you are unable to see or hear the truth anymore. The gentle tug away from your spiritual path, the gradual pulling of your heart away from God's calling, might feel like nothing more than a minor inconvenience or a small compromise. But when these compromises accumulate, they create a force strong enough to divert you from the divine course you were meant to follow. What feels soothing to the flesh can be devastating to the spirit, and this is the subtle trap that many fall into. The flesh craves comfort, ease, and familiarity, and relationships often provide that. The soothing words, the familiarity of shared history, or the comforting presence of someone who makes you feel good in the moment can all seem like blessings. But you must understand, not every comfort is from God, and not every relationship that provides temporary relief is aligned with your calling. Just because something feels good to your flesh does not mean it is spiritually healthy for you. The flesh is driven by desire and satisfaction, while the spirit is driven by obedience and purpose. When you give in to the soothing allure of a relationship that is misaligned with your spiritual destiny, you are feeding the flesh, not the spirit. The consequences of this may not be immediately visible, but over time, your spiritual sensitivity begins to dull. Prayer becomes less urgent, worship feels less meaningful, and the voice of God grows quieter within you. This slow numbing of your spiritual senses is one of the most dangerous effects of misaligned relationships. You begin to lose sight of your purpose, not because it was taken from you, but because you've allowed distractions and misalignments to dull your spiritual vision. The things that once sparked passion in your spirit, prayer, devotion, the pursuit of God's will, begin to fade into the background as you focus more on the comfort and affirmation these relationships bring. The longer you remain in them, the harder it becomes to recognize that you are veering off course. What felt harmless at first now feels like a tug of war between your flesh and your spirit. But because of the gradual nature of the shift, you hardly realize how far you've drifted. Heaven, in its mercy, sees what you cannot. God is able to look beyond the present moment, beyond the comfort and temporary satisfaction these relationships offer, and see the long-term impact they will have on your future. God knows where the path you're on is leading, even if you cannot yet see it. Heaven has a divine perspective that goes beyond your emotions, your desires, and your current circumstances. The choices you make today, especially the relationships you choose to invest in, are shaping your tomorrow. If you continue down a path of emotional comfort at the expense of your spiritual growth and alignment with God's will, you are walking toward a future that is less than the one God intended for you. The connections you keep are either building up your purpose or subtly tearing it down. God's love for you is so great that He sees what you cannot. He knows the destination of every relationship in your life, and when He warns you about a relationship that is misaligned, He is protecting your future. The purpose He has placed within you is precious and requires careful protection. There are relationships that, while they may not be evil in themselves, are not aligned with the unique calling He has set for your life. God sees the future and is calling you to act now before the slow erosion of your purpose becomes a permanent shift. The timing of this message is not coincidental. It is sent in love to ensure that you do not allow the subtle destruction of your spiritual vision to continue unnoticed. God is giving you a moment to choose. Will you act now and distance yourself from relationships that threaten your spiritual clarity? Will you choose to protect your calling, even if it means letting go of connections that provide temporary comfort? What you are experiencing right now, the unease, the quiet sense of something not quite right, is God's way of giving you spiritual sight. It is your spirit waking up to the truth that something is misaligned. This feeling is not random. It is a divine alert that you are being called to pay attention, to see beyond the surface, and to understand the deeper consequences of the relationships in your life. This is the time to discern where you have been spiritually compromised, where your obedience has been dulled, and where your focus has shifted from the things that truly matter. Heaven is giving you the opportunity to make a choice, to step away from relationships that drain your spiritual energy and refocus on the path that leads to your divine purpose. You are not being asked to give up comfort for the sake of discomfort, but to choose a higher, lasting peace over temporary relief. God sees the bigger picture, and He is calling you to align your choices with His will, even if it costs you comfort in the moment. Remember, the quiet erosion of your purpose is not always noticeable at first. It starts small, with just a shift in priorities here and a compromise there. But over time, the damage becomes undeniable. You may find yourself spiritually exhausted, disconnected from God, and unclear about your purpose. Heaven is giving you this moment to redirect your course before this subtle destruction becomes irreversible. The relationships you are nurturing now are either leading you closer to the fullness of your calling or slowly pulling you away from it. God is asking you to make the necessary adjustments now, while there is still time, so that you can continue walking in the destiny He has planned for you. Choose wisely. Discern the spirits in your relationships and protect your purpose. Heaven sees what you cannot, and its perspective is your guide. Act in alignment with God's will, and you will avoid the quiet destruction that seeks to erode your divine calling. In the journey of faith, one of the most profound lessons we encounter is the cost of obedience and disobedience. Obeying God's direction is rarely easy. It often requires us to let go of things that are familiar, comfortable, or emotionally satisfying. It demands a willingness to trust, even when we don't fully understand the reasons behind His guidance. Obedience is not always convenient. It often challenges our desires, our understanding, and our timing. Yet, it is precisely through obedience that we grow spiritually and are protected from the dangers that lie ahead. The price of disobedience, however, is far greater than any temporary discomfort we might face in the process of following God's will. When we refuse to obey, even in the smallest things, we risk missing out on the fullness of the life God has intended for us. Disobedience may not seem like a significant step away from His will in the moment, but each small act of disobedience adds up, pulling us further from His purpose and leaving us exposed to spiritual vulnerabilities. The cost of disobedience may not always be immediately evident, but in the long term, it leads to missed opportunities, spiritual numbness, and an inability to fully experience the blessings that come with walking in alignment with God. Obedience, on the other hand, may not always be easy, but it is the key to spiritual growth and protection. When God calls us to something, whether it's a decision to walk away from a relationship, change our course of action, or simply trust Him in an area of uncertainty, obedience is the way forward. It is through obedience that we learn to rely on God's wisdom instead of our own. And in doing so, we open the door to spiritual growth. Obedience brings us into alignment with God's will, and this alignment is where we find the true peace, joy, and purpose that only He can offer. Obeying God's direction may feel difficult in the moment, especially if it requires sacrifice or a change in direction. But it is in these moments of surrender that we experience the deepest levels of spiritual transformation. God's ways are higher than our ways, and His understanding far surpasses our own. Obedience acknowledges that He knows better than we do, that His plans for us are always good, and that the blessings on the other side of obedience far outweigh any temporary discomfort we may experience. But the warning in this message is clear. Disobedience comes at a high price, and often it's a price we don't recognize until it's too late. Heaven's intervention in your life right now is not a mere suggestion. It's a divine warning. God sees what you cannot see, and He is speaking to you because He knows the potential cost of ignoring this call to obedience. Disobedience doesn't always lead to an immediate downfall. Sometimes it takes time for the consequences to manifest, and this delayed response can make us complacent. We may think that we can continue in disobedience without any real cost. But the reality is that, over time, the spiritual consequences build. Ignoring God's guidance, dismissing His warnings, and allowing ourselves to stay in misaligned relationships or situations can erode our clarity, peace, and purpose. What feels like a small compromise today can become a major obstacle to God's blessings tomorrow. Heaven is sending you this message now because it loves you enough to warn you before the cost becomes too high. This divine warning is an act of mercy. It's God's way of intervening in your life to give you the opportunity to realign before the consequences of disobedience deepen. God does not want you to experience unnecessary pain, regret, or loss. His warning is not meant to condemn you, but to protect you. The pain of obedience is momentary, but the joy of walking in alignment with God's will lasts forever. The consequences of disobedience, however, are far-reaching and can impact not just you, but those around you and the future God has for you. His love for you is so great that He is speaking now to prevent you from experiencing that cost. To better understand the importance of obedience, consider the example of Abraham and Lot. Their story is one of profound significance when it comes to the cost of obedience and the blessing that follows. In the book of Genesis, we learn that Abraham and Lot were once close, both spiritually and in their shared journey. However, as they grew in wealth and their flocks expanded, their relationship began to face strain. The land could no longer sustain both of them, and a separation was required. Abraham, despite the deep bond they shared, chose to follow God's direction and separate from Lot, even though it may have seemed painful or inconvenient at the time. There was no betrayal, no conflict. The separation was simply necessary for both of them to fulfill their divine destinies. Abraham's willingness to obey, even when it meant letting go of what was familiar, opened the door for him to receive a promise from God. God made a covenant with him, declaring that He would bless Abraham abundantly and make his descendants as numerous as the stars. Had Abraham refused to obey and remained attached to Lot, he would have missed out on the fullness of the blessings God had in store for him. The separation was not a punishment. It was an act of divine redirection that positioned Abraham for the fulfillment of God's promises. Lot, on the other hand, was given the choice of land, and he chose what appeared to be the better option in the moment, but it ultimately led him to a place of spiritual decline. His decision to prioritize comfort over obedience led to a series of unfortunate events that had a lasting impact on his life and the lives of his descendants. Abraham's obedience was not without cost, but it resulted in blessings far greater than he could have imagined. The separation, though difficult, led him to a place of divine clarity, and his obedience positioned him to receive the promises of God. Lot's disobedience, on the other hand, led him to a path of destruction. The story of Abraham and Lot reminds us that sometimes obedience requires us to make difficult choices, even when they involve letting go of what seems good or familiar. It teaches us that obedience is not always about doing what is easy or comfortable, but about trusting God's plan for us, even when it means walking a different path than we expected. This is the kind of obedience that God is calling you to today. It is a willingness to trust Him with your relationships, your decisions, and your future. It is a commitment to obey, even when the path is difficult, because you know that the blessings that follow are worth the sacrifice. The price of disobedience may not be immediately evident, but the cost is real. Heaven sees the long-term impact of every choice you make, and it is sending you this message of mercy today because it wants to protect your future. The story of Abraham and Lot teaches us that sometimes separation is not rejection. It is realignment. Sometimes letting go of a relationship or a situation is not about failure, but about positioning yourself for God's greater purpose. The cost of obedience is small in comparison to the eternal blessings that come from walking in God's will. Trust that when you obey, you are not losing anything of value, but instead, you are gaining everything that God has promised you. Obedience may challenge your emotions, but it will always lead you to greater purpose, clarity, and spiritual growth. Choose obedience today and experience the fullness of God's blessings tomorrow. In the tapestry of life, relationships hold immense power. They are not just connections formed by chance, they are often divine appointments that have the ability to either strengthen or fracture your calling. God, in His infinite wisdom, places people in your life who can help shape, challenge, and propel you toward the destiny He has designed for you. However, not all relationships are created equal. Some are meant to support your spiritual growth, to encourage you toward your higher calling, while others may silently drain your energy, diverting your focus from the path God has set before you. The relationships you cultivate, whether friendships, family ties, or romantic connections, have a profound impact on your spiritual journey. They can either help solidify your purpose or serve as distractions that lead you further from it. This is why discerning the role of each relationship in your life is so crucial. Relationships are not neutral. They either align with your divine destiny or slowly erode it. The people you surround yourself with can either elevate your perspective, challenge you to grow, and push you closer to God's will, or they can pull you in directions that weaken your spiritual clarity and divert you from the purpose God has for you. This is not a small matter. The connections you choose to nurture today are helping to shape your future. One of the most profound lessons that God teaches us through relationships is the importance of proximity. Sometimes, the very closeness of a relationship can limit the promise that God has placed over your life. This is a difficult truth to embrace because it goes against the natural desire to hold on to what feels familiar, what feels comforting, and what has been a part of your journey for so long. But sometimes, for your destiny to unfold in the way God intended, distance in relationships is necessary. Distance does not mean rejection. It does not imply that the people in your life are bad or evil. It simply means that, for the sake of your calling, a separation is required in order to realign you with God's will. Just as Abraham had to separate from Lot to receive the fullness of God's promises, you too may need to step away from certain relationships, not because they are inherently wrong, but because they are limiting the greater promise God has for you. Proximity to certain people, no matter how much you love them, may be hindering your ability to walk in the fullness of your purpose. These relationships, while not toxic in themselves, can become entanglements that prevent you from moving forward into the next phase of your destiny. God may be calling you to step back, to allow some space, so that you can realign with His will and step into the next season of your life. It's not about cutting people out of your life permanently, but about creating room for the things that God wants to do in you and through you. This can be a painful process, especially when the relationships involved are close to your heart. The emotional pull to stay in familiar, comforting relationships can be incredibly strong. However, spiritual alignment requires that you trust God's timing and His direction, even when it leads you to places that feel uncomfortable or uncertain. The truth is, sometimes the greatest growth happens when we allow God to reposition us, even if that means stepping away from relationships that have been part of our journey up to this point. Distance may be required to protect the purity of your calling, to prevent emotional entanglements from clouding your judgment, and to make room for the new things that God is preparing for you. In the end, God's ways are always better than our own, and He will never ask you to give up something without replacing it with something far greater. This leads to a powerful distinction that we must make in all our relationships: the difference between emotional attraction and spiritual alignment. Emotional attraction is often driven by feelings, comfort, and familiarity. It's the natural pull we feel toward others based on shared experiences, mutual affection, or the desire to be understood. There's nothing inherently wrong with emotional attraction. It's a part of what makes us human. However, when we base our decisions solely on emotions, we can easily miss God's best for us. Spiritual alignment, on the other hand, is grounded in a deeper understanding of God's will for our lives. It is rooted in obedience, purpose, and the call to live according to His plans, not our own desires or emotional needs. The key difference is that spiritual alignment is not swayed by momentary feelings or temporary comforts. It is steadfast, clear, and guided by God's direction. Emotional attraction may feel intense in the moment, but it does not always lead to spiritual growth or alignment with God's purpose. Spiritual alignment, however, leads to lasting peace, fulfillment, and the clarity to make decisions that honor God and serve your divine calling. When relationships are grounded in emotional attraction alone, they may feel good in the moment, but over time, they can cause spiritual instability. What feels comfortable emotionally can sometimes undermine the clarity of your spiritual vision. This is why it's so important to ask yourself, are these relationships leading me closer to God's purpose for me? Or are they simply feeding my emotions? Spiritual alignment, on the other hand, always leads to growth. Even when the emotional pull is strong, you will find peace in the alignment with God's will. It's not always easy, but it's always worth it. As you navigate your relationships, it's important to seek God's guidance on whether the emotional pull you feel is leading you toward His will or away from it. Relationships that are spiritually aligned will strengthen your purpose, inspire you to grow, and push you to pursue God's calling for your life. They won't leave you stagnant or distracted, but will challenge you to become more of who God has created you to be. These relationships are marked by mutual respect, shared values, and a commitment to growing together in faith. They honor God's direction in your life and encourage you to stay aligned with His will. Conversely, relationships that are based solely on emotional attraction can create a sense of attachment that clouds your judgment. While these connections may offer temporary satisfaction or comfort, they can slowly lead you away from your spiritual path, creating barriers between you and the greater purpose God has for you. The pull of emotional attachment can often drown out the still, small voice of God that is trying to lead you in the right direction. These are the relationships that require discernment, where you must test the spirits and ask yourself whether they are aligned with your spiritual growth and divine purpose. At the core of every healthy, spiritually aligned relationship is a shared commitment to seeking God's will above all else. It's not about the immediate feelings of attraction or comfort, but about the long-term vision of walking together toward the destiny God has for each person. These are the relationships that strengthen your faith, help you stay focused on your calling, and encourage you to grow spiritually. In the end, the role of relationships in shaping your destiny cannot be underestimated. The connections you make today will influence the direction of your life tomorrow. As you seek spiritual alignment in your relationships, trust that God will guide you to the people who will strengthen your calling, challenge you to grow, and walk with you in purpose. By choosing relationships that are aligned with God's will, you open yourself to a future filled with clarity, peace, and the fullness of His divine plan. The battle between emotion and discernment is one of the most critical spiritual struggles you will face on your journey. Emotions are a powerful force within us. They shape our perceptions, our actions, and our desires. In relationships, work, and personal decisions, emotions can feel like a guiding compass, leading us toward what feels comfortable and safe. These feelings of comfort, familiarity, and emotional connection can be enticing and convincing. They may lead us to believe that we are on the right path, that everything is aligned with our desires, and that the choices we make are based on what feels right. But this is where the battle begins. While emotions can offer temporary relief, comfort, and affirmation, they do not always lead us to divine purpose or align with God's destiny for our lives. Divine discernment, however, requires us to rise above the surface-level feelings and see things from God's perspective. It calls us to listen carefully to His still, small voice, which may not always align with our emotional pull. The emotions that seem to guide us towards safety and comfort can, in reality, divert us from the path God has set before us. They can keep us trapped in situations, relationships, and decisions that do not serve our greater calling. God's purpose for our lives often requires that we step out of our comfort zones, make hard choices, and trust His guidance, even when it goes against what feels emotionally safe. This is the crux of the battle between emotion and discernment. The struggle to choose God's will over the emotional desires that seek to control our direction. As you navigate through this battle, it's essential to be aware of the warning signs of misalignment. Emotions, when unchecked, can lead us into attachment to things and people that pull us away from our spiritual focus. Emotional attachments that are not in alignment with God's will can slowly diminish your focus on prayer, cloud your clarity, and hinder your spiritual growth. When you find that your time with God is being shortened, your desire to seek His presence is fading, or your spiritual hunger is waning, it is a sign that your emotions may be taking precedence over your discernment. The more you feed into emotional attachments that are not aligned with God's plan, the further you drift from your true purpose. The subtle shift from spiritual focus to emotional attachment can feel gradual, almost imperceptible at first, but over time, it can create a spiritual void. You may find yourself distracted, spiritually depleted, and unsure of your next steps. This is why discernment is so crucial. It helps you recognize when your emotions are steering you away from the alignment with God's will and back into the path that leads you toward your divine purpose. This is where the importance of obedience comes in. The decisions we make in moments of emotional tension require us to choose obedience over comfort. God is calling you to make decisions that are rooted in obedience to Him, even when it feels uncomfortable or inconvenient in the moment. Obedience to God often means going against what feels easy or what our emotions tell us to do. It means trusting that God's plan is better than the temporary relief that emotional attachments may bring. Choosing obedience is not always easy. It may mean letting go of relationships, changing course, or facing discomfort. But when you make decisions based on obedience to God, you are aligning yourself with His will, which always leads to spiritual growth, clarity, and fulfillment. Obedience is an act of faith, a declaration that you trust God's purpose for your life over the fleeting desires of your emotions. It is through obedience that you walk in the fullness of God's plan and stay on course to fulfill your divine destiny. Even when the road is difficult and the emotions are strong, obedience to God's will is the key to overcoming the battle between emotion and discernment. Your future, your peace, and your purpose depend on the choices you make today. Trust in God's direction, choose obedience, and you will find that His ways always lead to the life He has destined for you. The gradual erosion of faith is one of the most deceptive spiritual struggles. It doesn't happen overnight, but rather through subtle shifts and small allowances in our relationships, decisions, and daily practices. These small compromises, often unnoticed at first, begin to accumulate, leading us down a path where our spiritual clarity and passion slowly fade. You may not immediately feel the effects of these small shifts, and in the moment, they may not seem like a big deal. However, as time passes, the cumulative impact of these subtle erosions can have profound consequences on your faith and your alignment with God's purpose. The key here is understanding that nothing is neutral in the spiritual life. Every decision, every relationship, and every moment of your life is either drawing you closer to God or pulling you away from Him. When we allow misaligned relationships or unhealthy attachments to continue unchecked, we give the enemy a foothold in our spiritual lives. These small allowances, while seemingly insignificant, eventually lead to a gradual weakening of our spiritual foundation. Like the slow wearing away of a rock by water, these small erosions slowly chip away at our commitment, faith, and clarity, until we realize we are no longer standing where we once were. This is the danger, that the gradual nature of the erosion makes it almost imperceptible until it's too late to prevent the damage. One of the most obvious signs that this subtle erosion is taking place is the diminishing of discipline and prayer in your life. As your relationships and commitments shift away from God's intended path, you'll begin to notice a slow decline in your spiritual practices. Prayer, once a vibrant and essential part of your day, begins to fade into the background. The same happens with your discipline in reading the Word and seeking God's presence. These spiritual practices, which once anchored you, begin to feel less urgent. What once felt like a deep need becomes something you can put off, and over time, you begin to feel more disconnected from God's voice. This diminishing of prayer and discipline is not something that happens suddenly, but it is a slow fade that happens when misaligned relationships and distractions pull your focus away from what truly matters. When you allow your relationships to dictate your decisions, rather than aligning your relationships with God's will, your spiritual practices become optional. The strength you once drew from God begins to fade, and you find yourself feeling spiritually depleted. The passion for prayer and devotion to God's Word begins to dwindle, and you may not even fully realize how much you've drifted until you look back and realize the distance between where you are now and where you once were. It's crucial, then, to recognize the signs of this gradual erosion before it becomes irreversible. Restoring alignment is not just about fixing a specific situation or relationship, but about addressing the root causes of your spiritual decline. It's about taking a hard look at the choices you've made and the ways in which they have affected your relationship with God. The longer you allow misaligned relationships or distractions to dominate your life, the more difficult it becomes to regain the clarity and connection you once had. But it's not too late to restore alignment. The beauty of God's mercy is that He always provides opportunities for redirection. The sooner you recognize that you've drifted off course, the sooner you can take the necessary steps to realign yourself with His will. God's grace is always available, and no matter how far you've drifted, His love is constant and unwavering. Restoring alignment requires intentionality and action. It requires that you make the conscious decision to return to the practices that once nourished your spirit, such as prayer, worship, and reading the Word. It means putting your relationships and priorities under the lens of discernment and deciding to distance yourself from anything that pulls you away from God's purpose for your life. Recognizing the gradual erosion of your faith is the first step in reclaiming your spiritual strength and clarity. Once you acknowledge that small compromises have led you away from God's will, you can take the necessary steps to rebuild what has been lost. This process may feel uncomfortable at first, as you may have to let go of relationships, habits, or even mindsets that have become deeply ingrained. But as you return to God's ways, you will find that the peace and spiritual clarity you once had can be restored. Your faith can be reignited, your passion for prayer can be rekindled, and your commitment to God's will can be renewed. Just as it took small misalignments to slowly erode your spiritual life, it will take small steps of obedience and restoration to bring you back to where you need to be. Trust that God will guide you every step of the way, and that His grace will empower you to return to a place of spiritual strength and purpose. Recognizing and correcting the path before it's too late is one of the most important decisions you can make in your spiritual journey. It is not too late to restore your relationship with God, but it requires a willingness to take action, to realign your priorities, and to once again embrace the practices that draw you closer to His presence. The divine call for separation is one of the most profound aspects of spiritual growth, though it often carries with it feelings of discomfort and confusion. However, it's important to understand that not all separations are failures. Some are, in fact, divine redirections. The feeling of being asked to step away from something or someone can be painful, especially when that relationship feels deeply important or when the situation seems to make sense on the surface. But in God's economy, separation is sometimes the most loving and protective action He can take for you. It is a divine redirection meant to preserve the integrity of your calling. As much as it may hurt in the moment, God's wisdom far exceeds our understanding, and He knows when a relationship, situation, or attachment is no longer serving your greater purpose. In such moments, the call to separate is not about abandonment or rejection. It's about alignment. God's desire is for you to be in the best possible position to fulfill your divine destiny. Sometimes, staying too close to certain people or situations limits the broader vision He has for your life. Separation, then, becomes an act of obedience, a necessary step toward greater spiritual growth, clarity, and fulfillment. The purpose of separation is deeply rooted in the protection of your calling. Just as a plant needs careful tending and sometimes pruning to thrive, so too does your calling. Your spiritual journey requires protection, particularly in its formative stages. And sometimes, that protection comes in the form of removing influences that could undermine your spiritual health. Relationships, while beautiful and essential, are also weighty. They can either support your calling or quietly fracture it. Some relationships, despite being based on love and mutual respect, may start to pull you away from your purpose. Perhaps they're distracting you from the spiritual discipline required for growth, or subtly leading you into areas of compromise. When this happens, the call for separation is not punishment. It is an invitation to protect the very essence of your calling. Just as an artist must carefully protect a work in progress from outside interference, God, as the artist of your life, protects the masterpiece He is creating within you. His heart is to preserve what is sacred, and sometimes that requires cutting ties with what is no longer aligned with His perfect will for you. In the Bible, we see numerous examples of divine separations that weren't failures, but rather opportunities for God's redirection. One such example is the separation of Paul and Barnabas. These two were close companions, partners in ministry, and shared a deep commitment to spreading the gospel. Yet, when their differences over John Mark arose, they chose to separate. Barnabas wanted to give John Mark another chance, while Paul felt strongly about moving forward without him. This separation, though it could have been seen as a failure in their relationship, was actually a divine redirection. It allowed both Paul and Barnabas to expand their reach and to minister to different areas of the world. In the end, God used their separation to further His kingdom, and both men continued to have impactful ministries. The parting was not a sign of failure or the end of their purpose, but a stepping stone to greater fruitfulness. Another powerful example is the story of Ruth and Naomi. Ruth's decision to leave her family and follow Naomi was a divine act of obedience. However, the true nature of their separation unfolded later when Ruth had to step away from her past in order to embrace her future. By following Naomi to Bethlehem, Ruth not only found a new life, but also became part of God's redemptive plan. Her obedience to follow Naomi, even in the midst of loss and uncertainty, led her to a place of divine favor, where she eventually became the great-grandmother of King David. The separation from her past, though difficult, led to a divine purpose that would span generations. In both of these stories, separation was not a failure, but a redirection. It was an act of obedience that led to greater clarity, purpose, and fulfillment of God's will. These examples from Scripture illustrate that not all separations are losses. In fact, many are divine setups for something greater. God's plan often involves removing us from situations, people, or attachments that no longer align with the destiny He has for us. It's easy to become attached to what feels familiar, what brings comfort, or what seems right in the moment. However, if we are to fully step into the divine purpose God has designed for us, we must sometimes trust Him enough to let go of what is comfortable and embrace the unknown. The call to separate is not a call to cut off all relationships, but to discern which ones are truly aligned with God's will for your life. This separation requires trust. Trust that God knows what He's doing. Trust that He sees what you cannot. And trust that His redirection will always lead you to a place of greater purpose and fulfillment. Separation is a divine invitation to realign with God's will, to protect your spiritual integrity, and to position yourself for the fullness of what He has for you. It may be difficult in the moment, but the reward of obedience is always worth the cost. Trust that God is working all things together for your good, even when it involves stepping away from what feels safe or familiar. Separation, when guided by God's wisdom, leads to greater freedom, clarity, and alignment with His divine plan. As you embrace this call to separate, you can be assured that God is protecting your purpose and guiding you toward a destiny that is greater than anything you could imagine. Just as He did for Abraham, Paul, Barnabas, Ruth, and Naomi, He is at work in your life, leading you to the place where your calling will be fully realized. Take courage and step forward in obedience, knowing that God's redirection is always a divine invitation to something greater. In this moment, you are standing at a turning point. The message you have received is not one of condemnation, but one of divine mercy. It is an act of love and protection from a God who sees the bigger picture, a God who is deeply invested in your journey and who longs for you to walk in the fullness of His purpose for your life. The warning given to you is not to cause fear or distress, but to guide you away from potential harm and toward a path of clarity and purpose. Every word of guidance, every redirection, and every whisper of discernment from heaven is designed to preserve you, to keep you aligned with the calling God has placed on your life. The road ahead may not always be easy, but obedience to God's voice is the key to spiritual preservation. When you choose to follow His guidance, you are protecting the destiny He has for you. Obedience may cost you in the short term, but it is the surest way to ensure that your future is secure, aligned with God's will, and filled with His blessings. Faith plays an essential role in this process. It requires faith to trust God's timing, especially when it feels uncomfortable or when the path seems unclear. But God's timing is perfect, even when it does not match your own. When you trust that His plan is far greater than your own understanding, you unlock the power to walk in obedience, even when it's difficult. Faith is the belief that God is working all things together for your good, even when the road feels uncertain. It is through faith that we embrace the moments of difficulty and surrender our will to God's higher plan. Trusting in His timing allows you to step into the fullness of what He has for you. Even when the way seems challenging or the decisions feel costly, know that they are leading you to a greater purpose, one that is filled with His love, provision, and guidance. Faith transforms the obstacles of life into opportunities for growth, and it allows you to see beyond the immediate discomfort to the divine purpose unfolding in your life. Trust in God's timing and know that He is faithful to fulfill every promise He has made to you. Now, you are called to respond. This message is not just to be heard. It is meant to be engaged with, to be received with faith and action. As you read these words, ask yourself, will you align with God's will and purpose for your life? Will you step into the divine path He has set before you, trusting that His guidance is leading you towards something greater than you can imagine? The choice is yours, but know that when you align with His will, you are choosing a life of fulfillment, purpose, and divine protection. Heaven is calling you to respond in faith, to step forward in obedience, and to trust that every step taken in alignment with God's will leads you closer to your destiny. The road may not always be easy, but every act of obedience, no matter how small, is a step closer to the fulfillment of God's perfect plan for your life. Respond now and allow God to guide you into the next season of your life with peace, clarity, and confidence. Let us close in prayer. Father, we come before you with open hearts, asking for clarity, courage, and strength to follow your guidance. We thank you for your mercy in sending us warnings and for your protection over our lives. We acknowledge that your ways are higher than ours and that your timing is perfect. Help us to trust you, even when the path is difficult and uncertain. Give us the courage to walk in obedience, knowing that your plan is for our good and that you will never leave us or forsake us. We ask for the strength to let go of anything that is misaligned with your purpose for us, and the wisdom to discern the relationships and choices that will bring us closer to you. May your peace fill our hearts, and may your purpose be fulfilled in our lives as we align with your will. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.